The morning after the flood was eerily still. The storm that had raged through the night had vanished, leaving behind a landscape that no longer resembled the world James and Diep once knew. The sky hung low and gray, heavy with the scent of mud and broken wood. The air was damp, motionless, as though even the wind was too exhausted to stir. James stood in the middle of what used to be their home. Now it was nothing more than a heap of splintered timber, half buried in brown water. Pieces of furniture floated aimlessly like forgotten ghosts of a past life. The small garden Diep once tended so lovingly had dissolved into a smear of mud and shattered leaves. He could still hear her scream from the night before, a sound torn from the soul, echoing through the rain, raw with fear and loss. Diep sat nearby on a piece of driftwood, her trembling hands wrapped around her knees. Her clothes were soaked and torn, her hair tangled with mud and rain. There were no tears left, only an emptiness that ached to look at. "It's all gone, James," she whispered, her voice hollow. "Everything we built, gone." He turned toward her, his throat tight. "We're still here," he said softly. "That's something no flood can take away." But even as he spoke, doubt crept into his chest. He looked around, at the silence of destruction, at the broken world lying at their feet, and wondered if survival alone was truly enough. A small bird fluttered past, its feathers dripping. It landed on a cracked branch and shook itself, fragile yet alive. For some reason, that simple movement made Diep lift her head. She watched the bird struggle to balance on its trembling wings, but it didn't fall. James saw a faint spark return to her eyes. The flood had taken their home, their belongings, their plans, but perhaps not their hope. In that dull, silver morning, he realized something quietly miraculous: they were still breathing. Still together, still capable of beginning again. He stepped toward her, his shoes sinking into the wet earth. "Diep," he said gently, extending his hand. "Come on, let's see what's left of the village." Maybe we can help someone." She hesitated, then placed her trembling hand in his. The warmth of his touch cut through the cold wrapped around her heart. Together, they began to walk, slow, heavy steps, but steady. All around them lay ruin, yet within that ruin something fragile stirred, the quiet, stubborn beginning of hope. As James glanced at Diep walking beside him, her eyes no longer lost in despair but flickering with resolve, a thought came to him like a whisper from heaven. Could this be the beginning of a miracle? The village in ruins. The village lay in tatters. Houses that once stood proudly shoulder to shoulder were now twisted heaps of roof tiles and metal. Familiar dirt paths had turned into rivers of mud. The cries of frightened children echoed in the wind. James and Diep walked carefully, their hands still clasped, hearts heavy yet strangely calm. Everywhere they looked were faces, tired, tear-streaked faces of those who had lost everything. A mother knelt beside what was left of her home, calling out her child's name. An old man sat in stunned silence, staring at the spot where his small shop once stood. The world had been washed clean, but not in the way anyone wished. Without a word, Diep broke away from James and ran toward a small boy standing alone by the roadside. His clothes were caked in mud, his lips blue, his body shaking uncontrollably. "Hey. It's okay," Diep whispered, wrapping her arms around him. The boy didn't speak, but his small hands clung to her tightly, desperate. James watched her, a knot rising in his chest. Even after losing everything, her first instinct was to help. She didn't care about her torn dress, her freezing skin, all that mattered was that someone else was safe. In that moment, he saw something sacred in her kindness, a quiet strength no flood could drown. He joined her, kneeling beside the boy. "Let's take him to the shelter," James said softly. They might have blankets. Together, they carried the child through the ruins toward the only building still standing, the old community hall. Its walls were cracked, its roof half fallen, but it was alive with murmurs of survival. Inside, people huddled together, sharing food, whispering prayers. Someone handed Diep a dry cloth. She knelt, wiping the mud from the boy's face, humming a lullaby through trembling lips. James stood nearby, watching the light filtering through the broken roof fall across her face, soft, golden, almost holy. Despite the ruin around them, she radiated peace. It struck him then. Even in the aftermath of destruction, she was hope, personified. She was the miracle he had been too blind to see. That evening, as the sun struggled to pierce the clouds, Diep sat beside him outside the hall. "Do you think things will ever be the same again?" she asked quietly. James looked at her for a long time before shaking his head. "No," he said honestly. "But maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe we're meant to build something new, something stronger." She smiled faintly, resting her head on his shoulder. In the distance, a bird sang for the first time since the flood. And for the first time, James felt peace settle over him like sunlight after rain. The storm had taken everything, but it had also stripped away illusion, leaving only what mattered most: compassion, courage, and love. As the last rays of sunlight brushed Diep's face, James whispered to himself, "Yes, this is the beginning of a miracle." Rebuilding the world. Days passed. The muddy roads began to dry, and the sound of hammers replaced the silence of loss. The village was waking again. From the ashes of destruction, small acts of courage bloomed, someone mending a fence, a group of women cooking rice for hungry children, laughter echoing once more beneath the weak sun. James worked among them, sleeves rolled up, hands blistered from lifting wood and clearing debris. Once, he had led meetings in glass-walled offices surrounded by luxury. Now he stood ankle-deep in mud, exhausted, sore, yet profoundly alive. Diep moved gracefully through the village, her gentle voice bringing calm wherever she went. She organized meals for the elderly, patched torn clothes, and even gathered a few surviving flowers to brighten the shelters. Her kindness spread like wildfire, quiet, radiant, unstoppable. Those who had nearly given up began to smile again when she passed. One morning, as the sun rose over the muddy horizon, James paused from his work. He saw Diep by the riverbank, washing clothes in shallow water. The light caught her hair, turning it to gold. She looked up, met his gaze, and smiled, a tired, beautiful smile filled with warmth. Something shifted inside him. The woman before him wasn't just the girl he loved, she was the reason he believed in tomorrow. The flood had taken their comfort, their peace, but it had given him clarity. Love, he realized, was not about perfection or safety. It was about standing together when the world collapses. Later that day, he approached her, his voice quiet. Diep, he said, almost shy. I've been thinking, maybe we don't rebuild what we had before. Maybe we build something new, together. With everyone. She looked at him, eyes reflecting exhaustion and hope. A new beginning? She asked softly. He nodded. Yes, a place built on kindness, not just bricks. She smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes. Then let's do it, she said. Let's start today. And so they did. Brick by brick. Smile by smile. The miracle began to take shape, not from the heavens, but from the hearts of people who refused to surrender. The flood had washed away the old, but in its wake it left behind something purer. Unity, compassion, and love reborn. That night, as stars returned to the sky for the first time since the storm, James stood beside Diep watching lanterns flicker across the half-rebuilt village. We made it through the darkness, she whispered. Yes, James replied, his voice filled with gratitude. And maybe the miracle wasn't surviving the flood, but learning how to live again after it. A new dawn. Weeks later, the village was no longer silent. Laughter returned. Roofs stood again. The scent of freshly cooked rice drifted through the air. Flowers bloomed in the muddy soil, fragile, defiant, alive. James and Diep stood before what used to be their home. In its place now stood a small wooden house, humble but strong. The walls were rough, the floor unfinished, but it was theirs. Built with their own hands, and with the help of neighbors who had become family. Diep looked around, her eyes soft with wonder. "I never thought we could start again," she said quietly. James smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Neither did I. But maybe miracles don't fall from the sky, Diep. Maybe they come from people, from us." She leaned into him, listening to the sound of the river, no longer violent, but calm and steady. Children's laughter echoed nearby. Life was moving forward. As the evening sun bathed the village in gold, James took a deep breath. "The flood took everything," he said softly, "but it gave us something greater, a new reason to live." Diep looked up at him, eyes shining. "Then this really is the beginning of a miracle," she whispered. He smiled, kissed her forehead, and together they watched the horizon, where the river carried away the past, bringing with it the promise of tomorrow. The world had changed, and so had they. From the ruins, love had risen again, and that, above all, was the truest miracle of life.